I suppose I've been invited to appear before this committee so that I could be of some assistance in relation to the deliberations on the media bills. Perhaps it might be helpful if I make some introductory observations, but confining myself to some only of the bills. Can I begin by making a statement or two about free speech? While there are several rationales for free speech and a free press, different concepts, no one seriously doubts the critical importance of both freedoms to a properly functioning democratic society. On the other hand, very few people regard either freedom as absolute. Simply by way of example, there have always been laws against obscenity. There is contempt of both Parliament and the courts. There are laws against defamation. Each of those areas of the law inhibit what would otherwise be absolute free speech. One important issue for the committee is whether there should be additional regulation of the news media. The background against which this issue might be considered is as follows. Without any doubt, the news media, whether it's via print, broadcasting or online, is a powerful institution. It shapes the nation's policy and can change the course of history. At the same time, the news media can cause great harm to individuals, organisations and other groups in society. The media can cause harm when it does not adhere to the basic standards of fair and accurate reporting. Hence the need for there to be some oversight of the news media. There is some existing oversight. At present, the print media regulates itself through the mechanism of internal codes of conduct plus supervision by the Australian Press Council. Putting that into context, this amounts to an acceptance by the print media that its important role requires, first, the adoption and observance of codes of conduct, and secondly, oversight of that process. As a result of legislation, the broadcast media is regulated through internal codes of conduct approved by ACMA and externally through ACMA itself. On the other hand, the online news media is substantially unregulated. As regards the Australian Press Council and ACMA, neither form of regulation has worked well. 3 of the last 4 chairpersons of the Australian Press Council have spoken of its failings. The most significant failings I can list: a lack of public awareness of the Press Council, lack of powers of investigation, lack of resources, lack of powers of enforcement, lack of independence from publishers, slow procedures. Regarding ACMA, it's hamstrung by its limited statutory powers of enforcement and slow statutory procedures. So, if oversight is required, and both the print media and Parliament regarding the broadcast media think that it is, then the committee might easily accept that the existing models are inadequate. In considering whether the current proposal for a media advocate is an appropriate model, one important question is whether that model will restrict press freedom. The media advocate's role is to make sure that there is in place proper codes of conduct. Based on existing codes in Australia and elsewhere, a proper code will at least require fair and accurate reporting. It may also require the correction of serious error. Hence, enforcement of a code of conduct might require an editor or a publisher to publish an apology, a retraction or a correction. In reality, that is the extent of the potential encroachment on a free press. Moving on to one other issue that I just wanted to make a few observations about, that's the diversity issue. I don't have very much to say about it other than to remind the committee, if it needs any reminding at all, that economists explain that there is market failure from the concentration of news services. Concentration often results in a lack of diversity in views that are given voice, the possibility that only a handful of people, media owners and journalists, will unduly influence public opinion, and the potential for a decline in standards because of the absence of effective competition. Many commentators think that democracy loses out with undue concentration. They're the only opening comments that I wish to make, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Finkelstein, I'm sure you have been an interested observer in some of the evidence yesterday, or if you haven't been, you've read some of the press reports over the last few days. Would that be correct?
That's correct, yes.
I suppose one of the threshold issues in terms of the arguments that we've heard is that the legislation that is before this inquiry is anti-democratic, will destroy the freedom of the press, and will lead us to some authoritarian society where the minister can direct editorial content and the content of the media. Is there anything in that legislation that you see could achieve that purpose?
Well, whether those allegations are right or wrong depends wholly and exclusively on the legislation and the power that it gives, in particular, the media advocate. Those powers are, at least just reading the text, quite limited. The media advocate can declare that a body is a self-regulation body only if certain criteria are satisfied. Most of the criteria, I imagine, would be unobjectionable, that it's an effective regulator of its members, that it's got a code of conduct that deals with issues which the legislation sets out, privacy, fairness, accuracy and so on. Most of the topics that are dealt with in the legislation are covered by existing codes of conduct, so that the legislation prima facie does nothing new in that regard. One area which is different, which has the potential for requiring a media owner or an editor to do something which the media owner or editor does not want to do, is that a body will only be declared to be an appropriate body if it has, I'm picking up the language of clause 7E of the Bill for News Media Self-Regulation, if it has got, if it provides for remedial action. Now, one asks, what is remedial action? I suppose there are obvious things that remedial action will include, probably limited to apologies, retractions and corrections. And a fourth possibility, but one never knows until one sees the code of conduct which is to be approved by the media advocate, there might be a right of reply. Now, they are areas where in a properly working, functioning code, mistakes made by the media, by and large serious mistakes, serious factually incorrect reporting, that kind of thing, requires rectification. And the body which is to be declared as an appropriate body must have appropriate mechanisms, so that if you're looking at any encroachment on press freedom as opposed to free speech, because there is a difference between the two, this is the one area where an editor may be told what he or she should publish. That is, the editor should publish an apology, the editor should publish a retraction or the editor should publish a correction. Now, as I read this legislation, that is the beginning and end of imposition on a free press. It doesn't affect free speech, funnily enough, because the editor and the journalist can say what they like. There's no restriction on what they say and how they say it and when they say it. But if they say it wrong or if they say it badly, then an appropriate press council or appropriate body that has press council type functions can say what you said was false and you should correct it. And there's a mechanism here that would require that to be done. Now, in a very technical sense, that is a restriction on free press because it restricts the editor's freedom not to publish whatever the editor wants, because many people accept that part of press freedom, as opposed to free speech, is the editor's freedom to do nothing. That is, ignore what might be the truth or ignore facts, that kind of thing. There is that imposition. But I would be very surprised if any serious commentator would regard that as bringing democracy to an end. That's a long answer to a short question, Senator.
Yeah, thanks, and I welcome that response. So, Mr. Finkelstein, you don't feel as if you're a pawn in the end of democracy in this country, a pawn to assist in the abolition of democracy and the end of free speech?
This bill does nothing toward ending democracy, and it is a relatively minor imposition on press freedom and probably no restriction on free speech.